Hi there. What is Powerfx? Well, first and foremost, Powerfx is a language. It is the language that fundamentally underpins Power Apps. And in fact, before it was called Powerfx, it was actually just called the Power Apps expression language. So it's native to Power Apps, so every formula that you see within Power Apps uses Powerfx. So anytime you see me creating formulas, whether or not it's if statements or creating variables, you'll actually see that it is Powerfx that we're using, and we won't really refer to it very often. It's a language that's quite easy to understand, and one of the reasons why it is easy to understand is it actually has its roots in Excel. That's possibly an overstatement. I think it's probably better to say that when they were developing this language, they developed it by looking at what people had done in the Excel world and then moving that across directly into the Power Apps world. Now, it's a really cool language, actually. One of the things to note about it is it's similar to Excel. When you put your formula into Excel, the results of that formula are presented to you straight away. So from a development point of view, there is no concept of compiling in order to understand the results of your formula. And the other thing to note is that you, as well as getting your results straight away, you also get your errors straight away, and that's extremely helpful because you're not compounding errors within the products that you're creating. So it uses something that we call dot notation. Now, it doesn't always use dot notation, but we'll see later on that when we start creating buttons, that if we want to create the color for a button, for example, we can actually refer to another button if we wanted to, and then pull the color from there. Now, there are lots of more clever ways of doing things, and that's the example that we'll see later on. But it's just gives you the idea that you can reference other things by first of all referencing the object, and secondly saying dot, and then something like dot fill in this case to actually pull the fill property of the object that you just looked at. Sounds complicated. It's actually a lot more straightforward than in practice. Now, it uses this idea or concept of declarative logic. So it's kind of linked to this idea of no compiling, but essentially what it means is that if you want to know why the color of that button is red, all you do is to go onto the button and actually go to the fill property of that button, and you go and look at that, and it will tell you why it's red. And that's quite a nice way of looking at things. It certainly, if you're a citizen developer, it makes things easy to understand because you have your problem there, and then you go and have a look for it where you find it. As well as having this idea of declarative logic, there's also a concept of imperative logic. Now, declarative logic is this idea of calculating things and making things whether or not it's the text that appears, whether or not it's got italics or bold or whatever it might be. That's all declarative that we're talking about there. But as well as that, we have imperative logic. And imperative logic is the thing that means we can actually command things to happen. Now, examples of this are instructing data sets to be refreshed, navigating to different screens, clicking buttons so that forms can be submitted. That's all examples of imperative logic, and it's fundamental to that app building process that we have that ability to have imperative logic within our apps. Now, Powerfx is coming to the Power Platform So as well as it being native to Powerapps, we're going to see this in lots more places than we've previously seen it. And how far it goes remains to be seen. One of the first places they're actually going to bring it to is probably something that we won't even touch on, and that's this idea of dynamics calculated columns. So essentially there is you can calculate columns in Dynamics already. It's part of the Dataverse when you create columns, but the way that you get to create these columns is quite limited at the moment, and I think that we'll see that our options really expand when Powerfx actually comes to this particular space. But it's not just coming to this; it's actually coming to other languages. So the first thing to say on that is that those other languages will remain. So for example, within Power BI, you have two core languages. One of them is DAX, and that is data analysis expressions. That's the way in which we create our aggregations of data. As well as that, prior to that, you use this thing called M, and what that does actually transforms the data. And in both those cases, those languages will remain. So Powerfx is going to be something that's going to be brought in where something doesn't already exist that fits properly. And we will see that getting used with Power Virtual Agents, that bot creation process. We will see more of Powerfx in being introduced into that area. And I think this is a really great thing. It's a great reason to use Powerfx and become expert in it, because it's going to be used, probably for many years to come. Once again, the other Power Platform languages will remain. One thing to note though, and the one thing that I'm quite excited about, is that Powerfx will be coming in some guise to Power Automate. And I think that's going to be really interesting, because the expression language for Power Automate is quite tricky to use. So it'll be very interesting to see how far they can embed Powerfx in Power Automate so that you can create your cloud flows more easily. Learning about Powerfx. I mean, there are thousands of videos that you can look at on YouTube. Essentially, if you see any Power Apps video, you'll probably find that they're actually using Powerfx. Certainly, if they're creating Canvas apps whilst they're doing it, that'll be the case. And then there are some great places that you can use to learn about it. One of them is the Microsoft documentation, which I can tell you is fantastic, and they enumerate all of the functions within there. So if you're ever really not sure and you're a bit more into documentation, you can head there. The other place you can go to is www.powerplatformlearn.academy, and there you'll actually be able to go and see lots of courses and lessons that I've created to enable you to become expert in this really cool language. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to move over to the demos part of this, and we'll see more about Powerfx and how to make use of it. I'll see you over there. Here I am in the Power Apps documentation. It's the formula reference for Power Apps. If you want to get there, all you need to do is type in Power Apps functions. That will get you there quite successfully. You can actually see functions, signals, and enumerations written just here. And if we go into there, then what we'll see is a lot of references for the formulas. And for example, you could go and look at one of the formulas. Let's look at a really easy formula like left. and you'll see that actually you've got a number of text functions here, and it then shows you how you actually use those functions there. So you take a string and a number of characters, and then that is exactly the same way as it actually works in Excel. And I think that's what's great about this. So and the other place that you'll see, it's things like lower, so many of these things are just exactly the same as you'll see in Excel. And there are a lot of formulas, and there are an awful lot of data related formulas as well. So I would thoroughly recommend that you look here. Obviously, there is the Power Platform Learn.academy course, and this course, you can go onto this course, and there are literally hundreds of lessons, all relating to Power Apps, and they're designed to take you literally from zero to hero. By the time you get into looking at objects, we go through the the editor and so on, but by the time we get into screens and objects and properties and functions, then we're really getting stuck into the language Powerfx. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to jump out, and we're going to actually build an app, and we'll see how Powerfx works within that app. So to do that, I'm going to do an old favorite way of doing that. I'm going to go on to Office, then I'm going to go on to a SharePoint list, and what I'm then going to do is I'm going to build an app straight from there. So click onto SharePoint, then I'm just going to go into one of my SharePoint sites, then I can go on to one of my lists. So I've got a Marvel list here, and what I can then do is I can then create an app from this list. So you'll note that there's a drop down here. I can go click on create an app, and what it's going to do is it's going to create an app for me, which will have a lot of things built for me already. I'll say demo app. And if I click create, it takes it about maybe 2.5 minutes for that to be created. And then once it has been created, then we will see some of the properties of that. So there we have it. It's actually made the app for us. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do a little trick here, and I'm going to go onto the settings and the screen size and orientation. I'm going to make it landscape, click apply, and then it'll switch it around. It'll give it a little bit more space for us to use. Now what we can see is we can see a gallery here, and I'm not going to worry too much about that, but what I'm going to do is just show you that the language is working here already. So we can see the dot notation working here. So it's this item. Well, what are we going to get from this item? Well, we're actually going to get the title. But note that there are other things that they can get hold of. So when I click on the other field, it says this item.id. So if we actually have a look at our Marvel table here, we've got our ID column here. You've got a title here, and you got created and modified. So there's only a few fields that are in here. That was by design. Now what you can actually see is that there's actually a lookup to another SharePoint list here, and so actually if we wanted to play with that, we would be able to see that we would know the region that this related to. So in order to do that, I would go insert, pop a label in there, then it automatically goes and looks for an item there, and let's just see, is it country? You've always got to know your data source. It's origin lookup. So origin lookup, and we want to actually pull something out of the origin lookup. So if I actually click on this and then click on this particular record within that table, you'll actually see there's more than one record there. And what I can now do is go back to my demo app, and I'm going to say origin lookup dot, and I think it'll be value, and let's just see what it comes up with there. And in fact it's actually title that I should be looking up here. In fact, what is actually going to come out here is, interestingly enough, is actually going to pull out the ID. So I'm going to actually pull up from that, and I'm going to show something a little bit simpler on there. So let's just return to the demo app, and I want to just show you just some simple concepts here. If I pop a button in here and I, for example, go onto the color property, color, and I said, in fact, you can see a function being used there already, and I just make this red. Say, in fact, that's the color, and I'm going to go onto the fill property, and I'm also going to make that red. Now, what I can now do is I can now pop another button on the screen, and what I can do is I say, well, how can I make the fill of this new button the same as the fill of the first button? Now, the first button is called button 1, and I'm going to call it BTN. I'll call it test, BTN test, that's its name. So what I can do on here is I can go onto the fill property here, and then I can say, well, actually, I want BTN test, and I'm going to say dot, and I'm now going to say, I need a color, essentially, and I'm going to say dot fill. So I click on dot fill, and it's going to be the right property there, and that's the dot notation there. But I could do other things. I could do strange things, in fact. So let's go on to the text here, and in fact, I'm going to pop in a little text box here. So I'm going to put a text input here, which allows me to enter some information. And what I can now do is I can go onto there and actually change the logic. So I could say if text input 1, because that's what it will be called, text input 1 dot text, I'm going to pull out the text property, equals red, actually I'll say equals purple, then purple, I'm going to say purple, otherwise I'm going to say blue. And so what I'm expecting is that it's going to go blue as soon as I put on the bracket here. It's blue. Having said that, if I actually change the text here, so if I go into the play mode and click on here and say purple, we should find that it actually changes. In fact, it hasn't here, which is a little bit worrying. So we can just go into the button, and we can see why that isn't actually working. And in fact, the reason why it's not working is it doesn't actually produce that word there. Is actually it is actually a color, and what I need to actually do is put quotes around it, because text input 1 dot text is a text thing, so I have to compare it to text, and when I do properly compare it to text, you can see it actually works. So then, just thinking about this idea around if you make errors in your apps, then if I actually make a deliberate error in this app, I click the back button there, I've made a mistake. What we can do is, it doesn't want to matter what screen we're on in this app. I'm going to the edit screen here. I can go up to the top right hand side, and it's going to say, hey, you've got a formula that you've got wrong here. You can see it in the formulas element there. And I can then click on this, and it'll take me to that item. Then it says, hey, you've got a problem here, and I can correct that. Now it should actually gives us some kind of idea. The error that you get here, it really does depend. It says there's an error in this formula, try revising it and run it again. But quite often it will give you, an even easier error for you to read. So that's just an idea of that dot notation. And I'm just going to clean the screen up a little bit here, and but if we actually look at the gallery that we have here, I'm just going to grab these bits, remove them, and then we'll go and move up here. If you actually look at the gallery, it's quite elaborate looking in terms of what it's actually presenting, but in reality, all that's happening is that we have something called Marvel, and the Marvel is essentially a list, and the list is the SharePoint list that we were previously looking at. And so what this is doing, it's going back to SharePoint, and it's going to get those items for us and then just present them back to us. Now what we can do is we can sort them in all sorts of different ways. So we can now have a function. So we'll sort this. How are we going to sort it? Well, we're going to sort it by, say, title, and I will say descending. And so what that will do is it will actually make it so that the name that is towards the end of the alphabet will be at the top, and the ones at the start will be at the bottom. And you can see that working there as well. So that, look, this isn't supposed to be all of how the language works. This is just to give you a bit of a feel for the language and how it's relevant here. But you can even see that it has functions that are associated with data, as well as as well as having the ability to navigate us to different places. So and to give you an idea of that, we've just concentrated on declarative functions so far. But in fact, if we actually click on the plus here, then what you'll see is that we've got this navigate to edit screen, and then it says none. So all it's really saying is, when I click on you, I want you to go to the edit screen, and then you don't need to do any kind of funny transition. So if I go to there and click escape, then if I hit the plus, it will then take me to that screen. So that takes me to the end of this session, just looking at Powerfx. Powerfx is at the heart of building Canvas Power Apps, but not only that, it's actually coming to the rest of the Power Platform. So it's really, really important that you take the time to learn how to use it so that the skills are there for you in the future. If you like this video, make sure you let people know about it, and I'll see you in future lessons. See you soon.